The thunder of hooves against dry earth was the only warning Freya Miller had before she spotted the wounded rider on the horizon, his silhouette wavering like a mirage in the shimmering heat of the Colorado Territory, 1875. Her heart lurched against her ribs as her hand instinctively moved to protect the swell of her belly, 5 months of new life growing inside her, while her world crumbled around her. The rider approached her small homestead at a dangerous pace, his horse nearly spent. Freya recognized the desperate flight of a hunted man. Living alone these past 3 months since her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident had taught her to read danger in the wind. She reached for the rifle that rested beside her rocking chair on the porch, but something about the man's slumped posture made her hesitate. Blood darkened his left side, and as he came closer, his horse finally gave out, sending him tumbling to the ground less than 50 yards from her door. Prudence told her to bar the door and wait for him to die or move on. The wanted posters in town had warned of dangerous men roaming these parts. But something else, perhaps the same recklessness that had brought her west with Thomas in the first place, made her set the rifle down and hurry toward the fallen stranger as quickly as her pregnant body would allow. The man's face was half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat crusted with dust, but she could see he was young, perhaps 30, with several days' worth of dark beard shadowing a strong jaw. His breathing came in ragged gasps. "Mister? Can you hear me?" Freya knelt beside him, wincing at the effort. The man's eyes fluttered open, startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and focused on her with surprising clarity for someone who had just fallen from a galloping horse. "You need to run," he rasped, his voice like stones dragged across sand. "They're coming." Freya glanced at the horizon behind him. "Who's coming?" Instead of answering, he tried to push himself up, revealing a bloodied shirt and a wound that had soaked through his jacket. "Can't stay here. Danger to you. You'll die if you keep moving," she said firmly. "I have medical supplies inside." The man's eyes drifted to her pregnant belly, and something shifted in his gaze. "Madam, you don't understand. I'm Yates Blackwood," she finished for him, the realization dawning as she finally recognized his face from the posters in town. "The outlaw." "I know." Fear should have sent her scrambling back to the house, but instead, she found herself oddly calm. "You've been shot. Those men chasing you mean to hang you, not bring you to trial. I've seen how justice works out here." Yates Blackwood, accused of robbing 3 banks, killing a U.S. Marshal, and other crimes she couldn't recall, stared at her with bewilderment. "Why would you help me?" Freya couldn't have explained it herself. Perhaps it was the loneliness of widowhood, or the vulnerability of impending motherhood, but she felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. "Because you need it," she said simply. "And because you didn't draw your gun on me even now." She helped him to his feet, struggling under his weight. Together they made their way to her modest cabin, just as the sound of distant hoofbeats became audible on the wind. "We need to hurry," she urged, half dragging him inside. Once they were in, Freya barred the door and guided him to the small bedroom. "Lie down. I need to see that wound." "They'll search every house in the area," Yates warned through gritted teeth as she helped him onto the bed. "Why risk yourself and your child for me?" Freya busied herself gathering supplies. Clean cloths, her precious bottle of whiskey, needle and thread. "Because something doesn't add up. The Yates Blackwood they describe in town wouldn't have warned me to run. He'd have taken what he wanted." Yates winced as she helped him remove his jacket and shirt, revealing a bullet wound that had torn through his side. "You shouldn't believe everything you hear, but you shouldn't disbelieve it all either." "Hold still," she instructed, cleaning the wound with whiskey. The bullet had passed clean through, which was fortunate. "This will need stitching." As she worked, the sound of approaching riders grew louder. Yates tried to rise. "I need to go. They'll hurt you if they find me here." Freya pushed him back down with surprising strength. You'll bleed to death. Besides, I have a plan. She finished the stitches with practiced hands. Living on a homestead, had taught her basic medical skills and wrapped a bandage around his torso. The riders were close now. She could hear men shouting to each other. "Trust me," she said, meeting his pained gaze. "Can you do that?" After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Good. Now stay quiet." Freya gathered his bloodied clothes and shoved them under the bed. She threw a quilt over him and hurried to the front room just as pounding began on her door. "Open up in there," a gruff voice commanded. Freya took a deep breath, placed a protective hand on her belly, and opened the door to find 5 men on horseback, led by a hard-faced individual with a sheriff's badge. "Sheriff Mercer," she acknowledged with a cautious nod. She recognized him from her infrequent trips to town, though they'd never spoken. "Mrs. Miller," he replied, tipping his hat with a gesture that didn't reach his cold eyes. "We're tracking a dangerous fugitive. Seen any strangers pass this way?" Freya allowed her hand to tremble slightly. Is it him? The outlaw from the posters?" "Yates Blackwood himself," Mercer confirmed. "Dangerous man. Killed 2 more men yesterday during a bank robbery in Silverton." Freya's brow furrowed. "Yesterday? In Silverton?" "That's right," one of the other men said. "Shot the bank manager point blank." Something clicked in Freya's mind. Silverton was 2 days' hard ride from here. If the robbery happened yesterday, Yates couldn't possibly have been there. She'd learned enough about distances in this harsh country to know that. "I thought I saw a rider heading west about an hour ago," she lied smoothly. "Riding hard toward the foothills." Mercer's eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "Mind if we take a look inside, madam? Just to be safe." "I do mind," Freya said, straightening her spine. "My husband's been dead 3 months, Sheriff. I'm alone here with a child coming. The law says you need cause to enter a private home, and a woman's word used to count for something in these parts." One of the men behind Mercer snickered. "Cause enough that Blackwood's horse is collapsed not 100 yards from here." Freya didn't miss a beat. "That was my husband's gelding. Broke free this morning and came back lame. I was about to go check on him when you arrived." "That's so." Mercer dismounted slowly. "Because it looks an awful lot like a bay stallion to me. Fine animal, despite its condition." "Sheriff," Freya said, letting real weariness seep into her voice, "I'm in no condition to argue. That horse came from my property, and I'd appreciate you leaving it be. If you want to chase ghosts west, that's your business." Mercer stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "Mrs. Miller, harboring a fugitive is a hanging offense, even for a woman in your condition." Freya met his gaze without flinching. "Then it's fortunate I'm not harboring anyone." A tense silence stretched between them. Behind Mercer, his men shifted uneasily on their horses. "Sheriff," one called, "those clouds to the north don't look good. If we're going to catch him before he reaches the high country, we need to move." Mercer held Freya's gaze a moment longer before stepping back. "We'll be back this way, Mrs. Miller, and if I find you've lied to me." He left the threat hanging. "Good day, Sheriff," she said quietly. She watched them ride westward, her heart pounding so hard she was certain they must have heard it. Only when they disappeared from sight did she close the door and slide to the floor, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "Why did you do that?" Yates stood in the bedroom doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. He'd managed to pull on his pants but remained shirtless, the bandage around his torso already showing spots of blood. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Freya looked up at him, studying his face. Beneath the grime and exhaustion, she saw something the wanted posters hadn't captured, a profound weariness that went beyond physical pain. "They lied about Silverton," she said. The robbery couldn't have happened yesterday if you're here now. A bitter smile twisted his lips. Noticed that, did you? Why would the sheriff lie? Yates slid down the doorframe until he was sitting, one hand pressed against his wound. Because Sheriff Mercer isn't after justice. He's after the bounty on my head and making sure I never tell what I know. Freya managed to stand, moving to help him back to the bed. And what do you know, Mr. Blackwood? That Mercer and his men have been robbing banks themselves and pinning it on me for the past 8 months, he said grimly. I was a U.S. Marshal, investigating a series of robberies. Got too close to the truth. Freya's eyes widened. You're a lawman? Was, he corrected. Hard to uphold the law when you're branded an outlaw yourself. He grimaced as she helped him lie back down. Why did you help me? The truth this time. Freya sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how close they were in the small room. When my husband died, no one helped me. The mining company said it was his own fault. The bank gave me 30 days to clear my debt before they'd take the land. The town. She trailed off, looking away. The town had suggestions for how a widow might earn her keep. She turned back to him, her gaze direct. I've learned to look at people clearly, Mr. Blackwood. And when I look at you, I don't see a killer. Yates, he said quietly. If you're going to risk your life and your child's future for me, you might as well use my name. Freya, she offered in return. Freya Miller. A moment of understanding passed between them, fragile but real. You need to rest, she said, standing. I'll check on that horse and bring it to the barn if it can stand. We can't leave evidence for when they come back. They will come back, Yates warned. Mercer won't give up easily. Then we'd better have a better plan by then. Freya paused at the door. Rest. We'll figure this out together. As she walked away, Yates called after her. Why trust me? You only have my word against theirs. Freya turned, one hand resting on her belly. Because, Yates Blackwood, I see who you really are. And right now, that's the only thing I'm certain of. The wounded stallion had managed to rise by the time Freya reached it. The magnificent animal regarded her warily, nostrils flaring with each labored breath. It had been ridden hard, pushed beyond endurance. Easy now, she murmured, approaching slowly with an apple from her small orchard. We're both helping someone who needs it, aren't we? The horse accepted the offering, and Freya gently took hold of its reins. Leading it back to her small barn required patience, but she managed. The animal needed rest and care, but it would survive much like its master, she hoped. Inside the barn, she provided water and what little feed she could spare. As she worked, her mind raced. Harboring a fugitive, even one who claimed innocence, was dangerous enough, but defying Sheriff Mercer was perhaps even more foolish. The man had power in these parts, and she had seen how he used it. Yet something about Yates's story rang true. The discrepancy about Silverton was just the beginning. If he had been the ruthless killer described in the wanted posters, why hadn't he threatened her? Why was he traveling alone, wounded, instead of with a gang? And why would a notorious outlaw warn her of danger instead of creating it? By the time she returned to the cabin, the afternoon was waning. She found Yates sitting up in bed, examining a small framed photograph from her bedside table, Thomas on their wedding day, his smile bright with promise. Your husband? Yates asked, setting the frame down carefully. Freya nodded, taking a seat in the rocking chair beside the bed. Thomas Miller. He came west chasing silver. Found enough to buy this land, not enough to keep it profitable. I'm sorry, Yates said, and she believed he meant it. The mine collapse was 3 months ago, she continued. I found out about the baby the same week. Thomas never knew he was going to be a father. Yates's gaze dropped to her belly. How will you manage alone? A question she asked herself daily. One day at a time. The vegetable garden produces well enough. I sell eggs in town when I can make the trip. When winter comes. She shrugged, not wanting to voice her fears. You should leave, Yates said abruptly. As soon as I'm able to ride, I'll go. But you should take whatever you can carry and head east. Find family, start over. There's no family to go back to, Freya replied. And this land is all I have left of Thomas. All his child will have. Silence settled between them, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the distant lowing of her 2 milk cows. Mercer will return by nightfall, Yates finally said. He'll have sent the others on a false trail, but he knows I'm here. How can you be sure? Because that's what I would have done, back when I wore a badge. He shifted, wincing at the pain. I need paper and a pencil, if you have them. Curious, Freya brought him the requested items from the small desk in the main room. Yates began to write, his handwriting surprisingly neat for a man in his condition. What are you doing? She asked. Writing down everything I know about Mercer's operation. Names, dates, locations of robberies. Evidence I've gathered. He looked up at her. If something happens to me, I need someone to get this information to Judge Hollister in Denver. Nothing's going to happen to you, Freya said with more certainty than she felt. Yates gave her a tired smile. Optimism is admirable, Mrs. Miller, but not always practical. Neither is pessimism when you're outnumbered, she countered. And it's Freya. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different paths. The moment was broken by the distant sound of an approaching rider. He's back, Yates said grimly, folding the paper and handing it to her. Hide this somewhere safe. Freya took the paper and quickly tucked it inside her dress. What do we do? You need to convince him I've gone, Yates said. Tell him you checked the barn and found signs someone had been there, but they've moved on. She shook her head. He won't believe me. He's coming back because he already doesn't believe me. Then we need a better hiding place than your bedroom. Yates tried to stand, but the pain from his wound made him stagger. Freya caught his arm, steadying him. The root cellar. There's an entrance through the pantry floor and another from outside behind the woodpile. Together they made their way through the small cabin to the pantry. Freya moved aside a small rug and lifted a trapdoor, revealing a ladder leading down into darkness. It's not deep, but it's well hidden, she explained. Thomas dug it our first winter here. Yates lowered himself carefully, his face tight with pain. If something goes wrong, it won't, Freya insisted, handing down a blanket. Stay quiet. I'll get rid of him. She closed the trapdoor, replaced the rug, and hurried to the front door just as Sheriff Mercer's knock rattled the frame. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find Mercer alone, his horse tethered to her porch rail. Sheriff, she acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. Your men find what they were looking for? Mercer removed his hat, a gesture of false politeness. May I come in, Mrs. Miller? The evening's turning cool. Reluctantly, Freya stepped aside. Mercer entered, his spurs jingling against her wooden floor as he surveyed the cabin with calculating eyes. Cozy place, he remarked. Shame about your husband. Mining's dangerous work. What can I help you with, Sheriff? Freya asked, refusing to be drawn into small talk. Mercer turned to her, all pretense of friendliness gone. Where is he, Mrs. Miller? I told you. I saw a rider heading west. Stop lying. Mercer cut her off. Blackwood's horse is in your barn, still saddled. Did you think I wouldn't check? Freya's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. I brought the horse in after you left. It was injured. I haven't had time to remove the saddle. And the blood on the saddle? On the ground outside your door. Mercer stepped closer. You're harboring a fugitive, Mrs. Miller. That's a serious offense. There's no one here but me, Freya insisted. Search if you don't believe me. Oh, I intend to. Mercer drew his revolver. And when I find him, you'll both pay the price. The threat hung in the air as Mercer began methodically searching the cabin, checking the bedroom, looking under the bed, opening the wardrobe. Freya followed, her anxiety mounting with each passing moment. Satisfied? She asked when he'd examined the main rooms. Not quite. Mercer's gaze fell on the pantry door. What's in there? Food stores, Freya answered truthfully. What else would be in a pantry? Mercer opened the door, examining the shelves of preserved fruits and vegetables, the sacks of flour and sugar. His boots scraped across the rug on the floor, and he paused. Interesting place for a rug, he observed, nudging it aside with his foot to reveal the trapdoor. Freya's blood ran cold. Root cellar. For storing potatoes and such through winter. Mercer smiled, a predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. Let's have a look, shall we? He reached down to lift the trapdoor, but before his fingers touched the handle, a sound from outside drew their attention, a woman's voice, calling Freya's name. Freya? Are you home, dear? Mercer straightened, alert. Freya moved quickly past him to the front door, opening it to find Flora Jenkins, the midwife from the nearest neighboring homestead 5 miles away. Flora! Freya greeted her with barely concealed relief. What brings you by so late? The older woman, her face weathered by years on the frontier, smiled warmly. Brought you some of those tonic herbs for your condition. Been meaning to drop them by all week. Her eyes darted past Freya to where Mercer stood in the doorway to the pantry. Evening, Sheriff. Unusual to see law enforcement out this way. Mercer nodded stiffly. Mrs. Jenkins. Sheriff's looking for an outlaw, Freya explained, watching Flora's expression carefully. Thought he might be hiding here. Flora laughed, the sound genuine but somehow pointed. Here? With Freya? Sheriff, I've been checking on this girl every few days since Thomas passed. Ain't been no one here but her. Mercer's eyes narrowed. When were you here last? Yesterday afternoon, Flora answered promptly. Brought a stew and stayed for tea. Right, Freya? Freya nodded, marveling at the older woman's easy lie. Flora hadn't visited in over a week. And you saw no one suspicious? No signs someone might have been here? Mercer pressed. Flora fixed him with a steady gaze. Only suspicious thing I've seen is a sheriff harassing a pregnant widow at dusk. Now, I don't pretend to know the law like you do, but I know decent behavior. And this ain't it. A tense silence followed. Mercer looked between the two women, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he holstered his weapon. I'll be watching this place, Mrs. Miller, he said quietly. And when I find proof Blackwood was here, there won't be anyone who can help you. He pushed past them and stormed out, mounting his horse with fluid anger and galloping away into the gathering darkness. Once the sound of hoofbeats faded, Flora turned to Freya with raised eyebrows. So, where is he? Freya stared at her, momentarily speechless. Flora sighed. Girl, I've lived out here 40 years. I know when someone's hiding something or someone. Now where's this outlaw the sheriff's so keen on finding? After a moment's hesitation, Freya led Flora to the pantry and lifted the trapdoor. Yates peered up at them, his hand on his holstered gun. It's all right, Freya assured him. This is Flora Jenkins, my neighbor, and midwife, and apparently now accomplice to whatever trouble you've gotten yourself into. Flora added dryly, helping Freya assist Yates out of the cellar. Once they had him settled at the kitchen table, Flora examined his wound with practiced hands. Decent stitching, she acknowledged to Freya. But he's running a fever. Wounds starting to infect. Can you help? Freya asked anxiously. Flora studied Yates's face. That depends. Are you really the killer they say you are, young man? No, madam, Yates replied, meeting her gaze steadily. I'm a U.S. Marshal, or was. Sheriff Mercer framed me to cover his own crimes. Flora considered this, then nodded once. Well, I've known Charlie Mercer for 15 years, and I never did trust him. Too quick with that gun. Too slow with mercy. She turned to Freya. Get me hot water and clean cloths. I've got medicines in my bag that'll help with the infection. As Freya bustled about following Flora's instructions, the older woman continued conversing with Yates, drawing out his story in greater detail. By the time they had cleaned and redressed his wound, night had fully descended. You can't stay here, Flora announced, packing up her supplies. Mercer will be back with more men by morning. He's not one to let a challenge go. I've been telling her that, Yates said, nodding toward Freya. Where can he go? Freya asked. He can barely ride. Flora's weathered face creased in thought. My place is too obvious. He checked there next. She paused, then seemed to come to a decision. The old mining cabin up in Fisher's Gulch. No one's used it since the silver played out 2 years ago. That's 10 miles into the mountains, Freya protested. In his condition, it's the only safe place, Flora interrupted. And you're going with him. Freya blinked in surprise. What? Mercer knows you helped him now. You think he'll let that stand? No, you both need to disappear until we can get word to the proper authorities. But my home will still be here when this is over, Flora said gently. If you're alive to come back to it. The stark reality of her situation settled over Freya like a heavy blanket. In the space of a day, her life had been upended completely. Yet looking at Yates, his face pale with pain but his eyes clear and determined, she knew Flora was right. How soon can we leave? She asked. Tonight, Flora replied. I'll help you gather what you need. While Yates rested, the two women worked quickly, packing supplies. Food, clothing, medicine, ammunition for Freya's rifle. Flora drew a rough map showing the way to the abandoned mining cabin and left to retrieve her wagon from where she'd hidden it down the road. Why are you helping us? Freya asked when the older woman returned. You're putting yourself at risk. Flora's eyes softened. I delivered you, Freya Miller. Brought you into this world 22 years ago when your mama passed through these parts. I've watched you grow from a distance, and I grieved with you when Thomas died. She placed a gnarled hand on Freya's belly. I aim to see this little one born safe, and that means keeping its mama out of Mercer's crosshairs. Tears welled in Freya's eyes at the unexpected connection. I didn't know. No reason you should. Your papa moved on east after your mama died, but I never forgot the baby girl with eyes like summer storms. Flora squeezed her hand. Now let's get you and your marshal to safety. They loaded the wagon, concealing Yates beneath blankets in the back. Freya took one last look at her cabin, the home she and Thomas had built with such hope, before climbing up beside Flora. The journey through the night was slow and tense. They avoided the main trails, following old hunting paths that Flora knew from her decades in the territory. Freya kept her rifle across her lap, scanning the darkness for signs of pursuit, while Yates drifted in and out of consciousness in the wagon bed. Near dawn, they reached the foot of Fisher's Gulch, where the trail became too steep and narrow for the wagon. This is as far as I go, Flora said, stopping the horses. The cabin's about 2 miles up, near the old silver claim. You can't miss it. How will I get him up there? Freya asked, looking doubtfully at Yates. The fever's broken, Flora assured her after checking on him. He's stronger than he looks. Between the two of you, you'll manage. They transferred their supplies to Yates's stallion, which Flora had brought along tied to the back of the wagon. The animal had recovered enough to carry their belongings, though not riders. "What will you tell people?" Freya asked as they prepared to part. "That you went to stay with cousins in Kansas City until the baby comes," Flora replied. "Simple story, easy to remember." Freya embraced the older woman fiercely. "Thank you for everything." Flora returned the hug, then pulled back to look her in the eye. "Be careful up there. Winter comes early to the high country. We'll send word when it's safe," Yates promised, now standing unsteadily beside the wagon. Flora nodded. "Judge Hollister is a good man. If anyone can help you, it's him." She pressed a small packet into Freya's hands. "Herbs for the baby. Steep them in hot water if labor starts before I can get to you." With one last embrace, Flora climbed back onto the wagon and turned the horses toward home, leaving Freya and Yates alone in the gray light of approaching dawn. "Can you walk?" Freya asked, studying his pale face with concern. Yates nodded grimly. "Don't have much choice, do I?" The climb was arduous. The trail wound steeply upward through pine forests, crossing rocky outcroppings and small streams. Freya led the horse, while Yates followed, stopping frequently to rest. His determination impressed her. Despite his wound and weakness, he never complained. By mid-morning, they reached the abandoned mining cabin. It was small but solidly built, tucked against a cliff face that sheltered it from the worst mountain winds. A stream gurgled nearby, providing fresh water. Inside, they found a single room with a stone fireplace, a crude table with 2 chairs, and a rope bed frame without a mattress. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, but the roof was intact and the chimney clear. "Home sweet home," Yates murmured, sinking onto one of the chairs. Freya busied herself unloading their supplies and clearing the worst of the dust. She built a fire in the fireplace, grateful for the warmth as the mountain air carried the first hint of autumn's chill. "We should be safe here," she said, arranging their bedding on the floor. "For a while, at least." Yates watched her work, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to come," he said finally. "You could have let Flora take me and stayed at your home." Freya paused in her tasks. "And what would have happened when Mercer returned?" "No, this was the only choice." "Still, you've given up everything to help a stranger." She met his gaze steadily. "Not everything. And not a stranger. Not anymore." Something passed between them then, an understanding deeper than words. In the space of a day, their lives had become inextricably linked. Whether by choice or circumstance, they were now in this together. "Rest," Freya instructed, turning back to her work. "I'll keep watch." Yates didn't argue, proof of his exhaustion. He moved to the bedding she'd arranged and was asleep within minutes. Freya stood in the doorway of the cabin, looking out at the vast wilderness surrounding them. The mountains stretched in every direction, indifferent to the human drama playing out in their shadow. Somewhere below, Sheriff Mercer was likely organizing a search. Her home might already be seized or burned. She placed a protective hand on her belly, feeling the baby stir within. "We'll be all right," she whispered, as much to reassure herself as the child. "We're not alone anymore." As autumn descended upon the mountains, the days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Yates recovered his strength gradually, the wound healing clean thanks to Flora's medicines. Freya adapted to their rustic surroundings with the resilience that had carried her through the loss of her husband and the challenges of pregnancy. They worked together to make the cabin more livable. Yates repaired the roof where it leaked and fashioned a proper bed frame large enough for Freya's comfort. She organized their supplies, carefully rationing food while supplementing their stores with berries, pine nuts, and the occasional fish from the stream. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking long into the night. Yates told her of his life as a marshal, tracking outlaws across the territories. Freya shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her marriage to Thomas, and their journey west chasing silver dreams. "How did you become a marshal?" she asked one night as they shared a pot of pine needle tea. Yates stared into the flames, his expression distant. "My father was killed by outlaws when I was 16. Rustlers took our cattle and shot him when he tried to stop them. The local sheriff did nothing. Turned out he was being paid to look the other way." "So you decided to become the law instead," Freya surmised. He nodded. "Spent 5 years riding with the Texas Rangers, then accepted a badge with the Marshal Service. Thought I could make a difference." His laugh was hollow. "Now look at me, hiding in the mountains, wanted for crimes I didn't commit." "We'll clear your name," Freya said with quiet certainty. "Flora will get word to Judge Hollister. And if she doesn't?" Yates met her gaze. "What then, Freya? You can't live in this cabin forever, especially with a baby coming." She looked down at her rounded belly, now 7 months along. "One problem at a time, Marshal Blackwood. First, we survive winter." Winter came early to Fisher's Gulch, just as Flora had warned. October brought the first snowfall, dusting the higher peaks with white. By November, the snow reached the cabin, and game became scarcer. Yates ventured farther each day to hunt, bringing back rabbits and the occasional deer to smoke over the fire. They had no contact with the outside world. Flora had promised to visit when she could, but the heavy snows made the trail impassable. Freya tried not to worry, focusing instead on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny garments from spare cloth and wove a cradle from flexible pine boughs. As her pregnancy advanced, Freya found herself increasingly aware of Yates's presence. He was unfailingly respectful, always maintaining a careful distance despite their close quarters. Yet she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart beat faster. One evening in early December, a blizzard howled outside the cabin walls. They sat close to the fire, Freya working on a small blanket while Yates cleaned his revolver. "What will you do when this is over?" she asked suddenly. "If your name is cleared?" Yates's hands stilled on the weapon. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Yes, you have," Freya challenged gently. "Everyone thinks about after." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he set the gun aside and looked at her directly. "Before all this, I was considering resigning my commission," he admitted. 10 years of tracking the worst men can do to each other. It wears on the soul. What would you have done instead? Bought land somewhere quiet. Raised horses, maybe. Had a family. His gaze dropped to her belly, then quickly away. "Simple dreams, I suppose. The best ones usually are," Freya said softly. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines like a living thing. "And you?" Yates asked eventually. "What will you do after?" Freya considered the question. After had been an abstract concept since Thomas died. Survival had consumed her thoughts. Getting through each day, preparing for the baby, now evading Mercer's justice. But beyond that, "I don't know," she confessed. "The homestead might not be there to return to. And even if it is, I'm not sure I can manage it alone with a child." "You won't be alone," Yates said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever happens with Mercer and the charges against me, I won't leave you to face things alone." Their eyes met across the small space, and Freya felt something shift between them, something that had been building gradually over their weeks together. Not just gratitude or dependence, but something deeper, something neither of them had been looking for. The moment was broken by a particularly fierce gust of wind that rattled the cabin door. Yates rose to check that it was secure, and when he returned, The conversation turned to more practical matters. Their dwindling supplies, plans for tomorrow's hunting, the need to gather more firewood. Yet something had changed. An acknowledgement had passed between them, unspoken but real. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The blizzard lasted 3 days, confining them to the cabin. By the time it cleared, 2 feet of snow blanketed the gulch, transforming the landscape into a glittering white wilderness. The cold was intense, seeping through the cabin walls despite the constant fire. On the 4th morning, Freya woke to find Yates already gone, his side of the bed cold. A note on the table explained he'd gone hunting and would return by nightfall. She tried not to worry as the hours passed, busying herself with indoor tasks, but by mid-afternoon her anxiety had grown. When she heard the crunch of footsteps in the snow outside, relief flooded through her. She hurried to the door, ready to scold Yates for making her worry, but froze when she opened it to find not Yates, but Sheriff Mercer and 2 deputies, their rifles aimed directly at her. "Mrs. Miller," Mercer greeted her with cold satisfaction. "Found you at last." Freya's hand instinctively went to her belly. "Sheriff, this is a surprise." "Is it?" Mercer pushed past her into the cabin, his men following. "Took longer than I expected to track you down. Old Flora Jenkins is quite the actress, had half the county believing you'd gone east." "How did you find us?" Freya asked, her mind racing. Yates could return any minute, walking straight into an ambush. Mercer smirked. "Blackwood's been careless. Left tracks in the valley when he went hunting. My men have been watching this cabin since yesterday." One of the deputies whistled as he examined the small space. "Cozy little setup you got here, Mrs. Miller. Mighty friendly of you to share such close quarters with an outlaw." Freya ignored the insinuation. "What do you want, Sheriff?" "Justice," Mercer replied simply. "Blackwood will hang for his crimes, and you'll face a judge for harboring him." "What crimes?" Freya challenged. "The bank robbery in Silverton that supposedly happened when he was already wounded near my homestead? Or perhaps the ones you committed yourself?" Mercer's expression hardened. "Careful, Mrs. Miller. Pregnancy won't protect you from charges of sedition." "It's not sedition to speak the truth." Freya stood as tall as her condition allowed. "I know what you've done, Sheriff. Framing an innocent man to cover your own crimes." "Innocent?" Mercer laughed harshly. "Blackwood killed my deputy in cold blood." "Your deputy attacked him when he discovered your operation," Freya countered. "He was defending himself." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "He's filled your head with lies, I see. Unfortunate." He turned to his men. "Secure her. When Blackwood returns, we'll be waiting." The deputies moved toward Freya, but she backed away. "I'm 7 months pregnant, Sheriff. You really want to be responsible for harming an unborn child?" Mercer hesitated, then sighed. "Sit down, Mrs. Miller. No one's going to harm you or your child as long as you cooperate." Reluctantly, Freya sat in one of the chairs, her mind frantically searching for a way to warn Yates. The deputies took positions by the windows while Mercer settled across from her, his rifle resting casually across his knees. "You know, I almost admire your loyalty," Mercer remarked conversationally. "Giving up everything to follow a wanted man into the wilderness. That takes a special kind of devotion. Or a special kind of faith in the truth," Freya replied evenly. Mercer studied her with curious eyes. "What is it about him that inspires such faith? You barely knew the man before you threw your lot in with his." Freya met his gaze without wavering. "I see who he really is, Sheriff. Something you wouldn't understand." A shadow crossed Mercer's face. "You think you know him? Did he tell you about his wife and child back in Denver?" The question hit Freya like a physical blow, but she fought to keep her expression neutral. "You're lying. Am I? Mercer smiled coldly. Why don't you ask him yourself? Oh wait, you can't. Because he never mentioned them, did he? Doubt crept into Freya's mind despite her resolve. Yates had never spoken of a family. But then, neither had she asked directly. They had shared so much over these weeks. Yet there were still parts of their pasts left unexplored. Even if that were true, she said carefully, it wouldn't make him guilty of the crimes you've accused him of. Perhaps not, Mercer conceded. But it does make him a liar. And if he'd lie about something that important, what else might he be hiding? Before Freya could respond, one of the deputies at the window hissed, "Rider coming." Mercer stood, moving to peek through the frost-rimmed glass. "It's him. Get ready, boys. I want him alive, if possible dead if necessary." "No!" Freya struggled to rise, but Mercer pushed her back down. "Stay quiet if you want him to have a chance," he warned. "Johnson, keep her silent." One of the deputies moved behind Freya's chair, his hand resting meaningfully on her shoulder. Outside, they could hear the soft approach of a horse through the snow. "Sheriff," Freya said urgently, "listen to me. Yates has evidence against you. Documents, witness statements. Killing him won't end this." Mercer's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. "What evidence?" "Enough to hang you," she bluffed. "Already sent to Judge Hollister with Flora Jenkins." "You're lying," Mercer said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Freya countered. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" The sound of footsteps on the porch silenced them. The door opened, and Yates stepped inside, a brace of rabbits in one hand. He froze at the sight that greeted him. Mercer and his deputy with weapons raised, and Freya held captive in her chair. "Evening, Marshal Blackwood," Mercer drawled, emphasizing the title mockingly. "Or should I say, former marshal?" Yates's eyes found Freya's, a silent question in them. She gave an imperceptible nod. She was unharmed. "Mercer," Yates acknowledged, carefully setting down the rabbits without taking his eyes off the sheriff. "Took you long enough to find us." "Drop the gun belt," Mercer ordered. Slowly, Yates complied, unbuckling his holster and letting it fall to the floor. "Now what? You shoot an unarmed man in front of a witness. Now you face justice for your crimes," Mercer replied. "Starting with the murder of my deputy. Your deputy drew on me when I confronted him about the robberies," Yates said calmly. "It was self-defense, and you know it." Mercer's face hardened. "What I know is that you've been interfering in my territory for months, asking questions, gathering so-called evidence. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" "I was doing my job," Yates replied, "investigating a series of robberies that all happened to occur in your jurisdiction, with no arrests made. And now you'll hang for it." Mercer raised his rifle. "Unless you tell me where this evidence is that Mrs. Miller mentioned." Yates's eyes flicked to Freya, then back to Mercer. "What evidence would that be?" "Don't play games," Mercer snapped. "She claims you've sent documents to Judge Hollister. Is that true?" A slow smile spread across Yates's face. "Worried, Sheriff? You should be. Hollister's had the ledger from the Silverton Bank for weeks, now the one showing your deposits following each robbery." Freya watched the color drain from Mercer's face. "You're bluffing," the sheriff said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Yates took a calculated step forward. "Why don't you ride to Denver and find out? Of course, by then, the federal marshals will already be on their way here." Mercer's deputy exchanged an uneasy glance with his companion. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Mercer barked. His eyes, wild now with desperation, darted between Yates and Freya. "Nobody's coming. And when I bring in Blackwood's body, I'll be a hero." The widow Miller tragically caught in the crossfire when the notorious outlaw resisted arrest. The deputy's hand tightened painfully on Freya's shoulder. She met Yates's gaze, seeing the calculation there. He was planning something, but with 2 guns trained on him and 1 on her, their options were limited. "Let her go, Mercer," Yates said quietly. "This is between you and me." "She made her choice when she harbored you," Mercer replied coldly. "Is this how you treat expectant mothers in your jurisdiction, Sheriff?" A new voice spoke from the doorway. All heads turned to see an elderly man in a black coat standing in the open door, a badge gleaming on his chest. Behind him, at least 5 mounted men were visible through the window, rifles at the ready. "Judge Hollister," Mercer gasped. The judge stepped into the cabin, his stern gaze taking in the scene. "Sheriff Mercer, I received some very disturbing correspondence about you. Rode out personally to investigate." "These are lies, Your Honor," Mercer stammered. "Blackwood is a wanted criminal." "Wanted by whom?" Hollister interrupted. "I've seen no legitimate warrants for Marshal Blackwood's arrest. What I have seen are detailed records of bank robberies corresponding precisely with your deposits in banks across 3 territories." The deputies lowered their weapons uncertainly. The one behind Freya released her shoulder and stepped back. "This is a mistake," Mercer insisted, though his voice had lost its authority. "Blackwood has manipulated—" "Enough," Hollister said firmly. "My men will escort you back to Denver for a proper investigation." "Marshal, are you injured?" "No, sir," Yates replied, straightening. "Just surprised to see you." Hollister's severe expression softened slightly. "Flora Jenkins is quite persuasive. When she arrived at my office with your documentation and story, I assembled a federal posse immediately." Freya rose shakily from her chair, one hand supporting her belly. "Judge Hollister, Sheriff Mercer threatened my life and my child's." "Add that to the charges," Hollister instructed one of his men. "Sheriff, surrender your weapon." For a moment, Mercer looked as though he might resist. His fingers tightened on his rifle, and his eyes darted desperately around the room. Then, seeing no escape, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He handed his rifle to the nearest federal officer. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he muttered as the officers secured his wrists with handcuffs. "Yes, it is," Yates replied simply. As Mercer and his deputies were led outside to waiting horses, Judge Hollister turned to Yates and Freya. "Are you both all right? Mrs. Miller, you look like you could use some rest." "I'm fine, Your Honor," Freya assured him, though she sank gratefully back into her chair. The tension of the confrontation had left her drained. "What happens now?" Yates asked, moving to stand protectively beside Freya. "Now you're officially reinstated Marshal Blackwood," Hollister said. "Your badge and papers are with my clerk. As for Mercer, he'll face trial for corruption, attempted murder, and every robbery we can prove he committed." Relief washed over Yates's face. "Thank you, sir." Hollister nodded. "You took an enormous risk pursuing this investigation alone. It was reckless, but ultimately successful." His gaze shifted to Freya. "And you, Mrs. Miller, demonstrated remarkable courage." "She saved my life," Yates said quietly, his hand coming to rest gently on Freya's shoulder. The simple gesture conveyed a depth of feeling that made her heart quicken. "Indeed," Hollister studied them both with shrewd eyes. "My men and I will camp in the valley tonight. We'll escort you both back to civilization tomorrow, if Mrs. Miller is able to travel." "I can travel," Freya confirmed. The thought of returning to the world below after their isolation both relieved and unsettled her. "Good. We'll depart at first light." Hollister moved toward the door, then paused. "I assume you two have things to discuss. I'll leave you to it." After the judge left, silence filled the small cabin. Yates knelt beside Freya's chair, taking her hands in his. "Are you truly all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. Freya nodded, but a question burned within her. "Yates, Mercer said something about you having a wife and child in Denver." Pain flashed across his features. He wasn't entirely wrong. Freya's heart constricted. "What does that mean?" Yates took a deep breath. "I was married 5 years ago. My wife, Sarah, was expecting our first child when influenza took them both." His voice grew rough with old grief. "I buried them in Denver before taking the assignment that eventually led me to Mercer's territory." Relief and sympathy warred within Freya. "I'm sorry. You never mentioned them." "It's not something I find easy to speak of," he admitted. "After losing them, I threw myself into my work. Didn't allow myself to think about family or future again." His eyes met hers. "Until you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. "What happens tomorrow?" Freya asked softly. "When we leave this place?" Yates's grip on her hands tightened. "That depends on you, Freya. I've been reinstated as a marshal, but I meant what I said about resigning. About wanting a quieter life. With horses," she remembered. "And a family." "Yes." His gaze was steady, vulnerable in its honesty. "These past weeks, despite the danger and uncertainty, have shown me what truly matters." "You've shown me." Freya's eyes filled with tears. "Yates, You don't need to answer now," he assured her quickly. "I know this has all happened so fast. Your husband hasn't been gone a year. You're expecting his child. I understand if you need time." Freya placed her hand against his cheek. "What I need is honesty, Yates. Complete honesty between us. Always," he promised. "Then I'll be honest too." She took a steadying breath. "I didn't expect to feel this way again after Thomas died. Didn't think I could. But these weeks with you, I've come to see who you really are. And that man is someone I could build a life with." Hope dawned in Yates's eyes. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying we take this one step at a time," Freya interrupted gently. "Return to civilization. Clear your name publicly. See what remains of my homestead. And then decide our future together." Yates raised her hands to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. "Together," he agreed. "That's all I ask." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the window. But inside the cabin, warmth bloomed that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. The journey back to civilization took 3 days. Judge Hollister's men fashioned a sled for Freya, ensuring she could travel in relative comfort despite her advanced pregnancy. Yates rode beside her, his badge once again pinned to his coat, though he wore it with a new perspective. They stopped at Flora's homestead on the way, where the midwife greeted them with tears of joy and relief. She insisted on examining Freya, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy despite their ordeal. "You've got about 6 weeks to go," Flora informed her. "Plenty of time to get settled somewhere safe." The question of where that somewhere would be hung unspoken between Freya and Yates. When they finally reached Freya's homestead on the afternoon of the 3rd day, they found the answer waiting for them. The cabin stood untouched, exactly as Freya had left it months ago. Inside, dust covered everything, but nothing had been disturbed or damaged. Her cows had been tended by a neighboring rancher at Flora's request. Even her chickens had survived, taken in by the same neighbor. "It's all still here," Freya whispered in wonder as she walked through the rooms. "I was certain Mercer would have burned it down out of spite. He tried," Judge Hollister informed them. But word of his corruption had already spread. No one would help him, and he couldn't do it alone without raising suspicions. Freya ran her hand along the table Thomas had built, feeling the familiar grain of the wood. This place held memories of her husband, good memories that deserved to be honored. Yet standing in the doorway was Yates, his eyes watching her with patient understanding. The future waiting to be written. "What will you do now, Marshal?" Hollister asked Yates as they stood on the porch while Freya reacquainted herself with her home. Yates gazed out at the land surrounding the homestead, good grazing land with a year-round stream, partially fenced for livestock. "I've been considering my options, sir." Hollister's eyes twinkled knowingly. "I imagine you have. Well, if you decide to remain with the Marshal Service, there's a position waiting in my district. But something tells me your interests lie elsewhere." "Yes, sir," Yates admitted. "If you'll accept my resignation." "Already processed," Hollister replied, producing an envelope from his coat. "Along with your back pay for the months you were falsely accused. You've earned your peace, son." That evening, after Hollister and his men departed for Denver with Mercer in custody, Freya and Yates sat together on the porch. The spring air carried the scent of wildflowers and new growth, a promise of renewal after the long winter. "Strange to be back," Freya murmured, her hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked actively. "Everything's the same, yet everything's different." Yates nodded, understanding. "Do you regret it? Coming back?" She considered the question. "No, this is still my home. Thomas's home. Our child's birthright." She turned to face him. "But that doesn't mean things can't change. That new memories can't be made alongside the old ones." Yates took her hand, his expression solemn. "Freya, I want to be clear about my intentions. I care for you deeply. These past months have shown me what kind of woman you are. Brave, compassionate, resilient. I'd be honored to build a life with you, to help raise your child, to create a family together." "But," she prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. "But I don't want to replace Thomas in your heart," he continued. "I don't want to erase what you had with him, and I don't want to rush you into something you might regret." Freya's eyes filled with tears. In that moment, any lingering doubts she might have harbored dissolved. This man, who understood that love wasn't about replacement but expansion, who respected her past even as he hoped for a future with her, this was a man she could love completely. "Thomas will always be part of me," she said softly. "He gave me this land, this home, this child. But my heart has room for more love. Yates, room for you." Hope dawned in his eyes. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying yes," she interrupted with a smile. "Yes to building a life together. Yes to making this land into the horse ranch you've dreamed of. Yes to raising this child and perhaps others as a family." Yates drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. "I love you, Freya Miller," he whispered against her lips. "I think I have since that first day, when you chose to see beyond the wanted posters to the man beneath." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling right, feeling true. "And I'm glad I trusted what I saw." In the weeks that followed, they fell into a rhythm of shared life. Yates used his back pay to purchase horses Tumares and a stallion to start the breeding operation he had long envisioned. Together, they expanded the fencing, repaired the barn, and prepared both the home and their hearts for the baby's arrival. Word spread through the territory that Marshal Blackwood had been exonerated and Sheriff Mercer arrested. Some neighbors who had kept their distance, uncertain about harboring an outlaw's widow, now visited freely, bringing housewarming gifts and offers of help with the coming birth. Flora Jenkins became a frequent visitor, monitoring Freya's pregnancy and sharing her wisdom about both childbirth and marriage. "You two are good for each other," she observed one afternoon as she watched Yates and Freya working together in the vegetable garden. Different paths that were meant to cross. When Freya's time came in late April, It was both Yates and Flora who helped bring her daughter into the world. After hours of labor, the cries of new life filled the cabin as dawn broke over the eastern hills. "She's perfect," Yates whispered, awestruck, as Flora placed the swaddled infant in Freya's arms. "Absolutely perfect." Freya looked down at her daughter's tiny face, overwhelmed with love. "She needs a name." "What about Sarah?" Yates suggested tentatively. "After my first wife? A way to honor both our pasts as we move into our future." Tears filled Freya's eyes at the gesture. "Sarah Thomas Miller Blackwood," she said, testing the name. "It's beautiful." Flora, wiping her hands on her apron, smiled approvingly. "Strong name for a strong girl. Born of sorrow and joy both." She patted Yates's shoulder. "I'll leave you three alone for a bit. Family should have time to bond." When Flora had gone, Yates sat carefully beside Freya on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at their daughter. Not his by blood, but his in every way that mattered. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said softly. "A family, a home, a purpose beyond the badge." "Neither did I," Freya admitted. "After Thomas died, I could barely see a future at all. Just endless days of survival. And now," she smiled up at him, "now I see everything. Years unfolding before us. Sarah growing up strong and free. More children, perhaps. This land flourishing. Us growing old together." Yates kissed her forehead tenderly. "I see it too. And I promise you, Freya Blackwood, I will spend every day making that vision real." "Freya Blackwood," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like that." "So do I," he murmured. "More than I can say." Baby Sarah stirred in her mother's arms, her tiny hand escaping the blanket to grasp Yates's offered finger with surprising strength. A beginning, promise, a family forged not of blood alone, but of choice and love and second chances. Outside, the spring sun climbed higher, casting golden light through the windows of the cabin. In the pasture, horses grazed peacefully. From the town, the sound of church bells carried on the clear morning air. "Listen," Freya said, her voice soft with wonder. "Do you hear that?" Yates listened, his expression puzzled. "The bells." "No." She smiled, radiant with joy despite her exhaustion. "The sound of our future beginning." He drew her and Sarah closer, understanding completely. In the quiet of that perfect moment, with his wife and daughter in his arms, Yates Blackwood no longer the town's most wanted man, but simply a husband, a father, a man blessed beyond measure heard it too. And it sounded exactly like happiness. 3 years later, the Blackwood Ranch had transformed from a struggling homestead to a thriving horse breeding operation. The original 3 horses had become 15, with Yates's careful breeding program producing foals known throughout the territory for their strength and intelligence. The cabin had been expanded to include 2 more bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a proper front porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Sarah, now a sturdy 3-year-old with her mother's storm-gray eyes and her adoptive father's determined spirit, chased butterflies in the wildflower meadow while her parents watched from the porch swing. Beside Freya, cradled in her arms, slept 2-month-old Franklin James Blackwood, named for both grandfathers he would never meet. "She's fearless," Yates observed proudly as Sarah ventured farther into the meadow. "Just like her mother." Freya leaned against his shoulder, content. "And stubborn like her father." "Which one?" he asked with a smile. "Both, I suspect." She glanced down at their sleeping son. "This one has your eyes. And your appetite." Yates brushed a gentle finger over Franklin's downy head. "Two perfect children. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." "Believe it," Freya said, turning her face up for his kiss. "You earned this happiness, Yates Blackwood. We both did. The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Flora Jenkins appeared around the bend in the road, waving cheerfully from her seat. "Flora's early this week," Freya remarked, adjusting Franklin against her shoulder as she stood. "Probably bringing more of those herbs she claims will keep Franklin sleeping through the night," Yates said, rising to help the elderly midwife down from her wagon. But Flora wasn't alone. Beside her sat Judge Hollister, looking much the same as he had 3 years ago when he'd arrived at the mining cabin to clear Yates's name. "Afternoon, Blackwoods," Flora called as Yates lifted her down. "Brought a visitor who was asking after you in town." Judge Hollister descended from the wagon with the dignity of his office, though his stern demeanor softened at the sight of Sarah running to greet them, her wild curls bouncing with each step. "Marshal, or rather, Mr. Blackwood," Hollister said, shaking Yates's hand firmly. "Mrs. Blackwood, you're looking well." "Judge Hollister," Freya greeted him warmly. "This is a surprise. Please, come inside out of the heat." Once they were settled in the cool of the cabin, with coffee for the adults and milk for Sarah, Hollister explained his presence. "I've come with news and a proposition," he said, accepting a cup from Freya. "First, the news. Charles Mercer was hanged last month for his crimes. The trial took longer than expected due to the extent of his corruption. Seems he had powerful friends." Yates nodded solemnly. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it, though I take no pleasure in any man's death." "Nor should you," Hollister agreed. "Justice was served, nothing more or less." "And the proposition?" Freya asked, settling Franklin in his cradle. Hollister set down his cup. "The territory needs a new sheriff, someone honest, experienced, respected by the community. The town council has asked me to offer you the position, Blackwood." Surprise registered on Yates's face. "Me? After everything that happened?" "Because of everything that happened," Hollister corrected. "Your name has been more than cleared. You're something of a folk hero in these parts. The marshal who brought down a corrupt sheriff against all odds." Freya watched her husband carefully, seeing the conflicting emotions play across his features. The badge had been his life for so many years before they met. Did he miss it? Did he long for that purpose again? "It's a fine offer, Judge," Yates said slowly, "and I'm honored by the council's confidence. But I have responsibilities here now." He looked at Freya, then at their children. "A family, a business we've built together. The position would allow you to remain here," Hollister pressed. "Your ranch is centrally located. You could serve as sheriff while maintaining your breeding operation, with perhaps some help." Sarah climbed into her father's lap, unaware of the significance of the conversation. Yates absently stroked her hair, his expression thoughtful. "What do you think, Freya?" he asked, meeting her gaze directly. "It's not just my decision." Freya considered the question carefully. "I think you would make an excellent sheriff," she said honestly. "You're fair, brave, and committed to justice. But it's also dangerous work, and you've already given years of your life to it." "The town needs someone like you," Flora interjected gently. "After Mercer, folks are wary of authority. You'd help heal that wound." Yates looked down at Sarah, then at baby Franklin. "Would I be gone often?" he asked Hollister. "Some," the judge admitted. "There would be circuit duties, escorts for prison transfers, the usual sheriff's responsibilities. But nothing like your days as a marshal. You'd be home most nights." A silence fell as Yates weighed the offer. Finally, he looked up at Freya again, a question in his eyes. She smiled softly. "You once told me you left the marshals because tracking the worst in men wore on your soul. Perhaps serving as sheriff would let you see the best in people instead. Create safety rather than just pursue those who destroy it." Understanding dawned in Yates's expression. You think I should take it? I think you should follow your heart, she replied. And know that whatever you decide, your family stands with you. Yates turned to Hollister. I'd like to discuss terms, Judge. Hours, deputies, resources. If I can be assured this position won't take me from my family more than necessary, I'm inclined to accept. Hollister nodded, pleased. I expected nothing less. Shall we discuss details while your wife prepares supper? I've brought the necessary paperwork. As the men settled at the table with documents spread between them, Freya moved to the kitchen, Flora following to help. Through the window, she could see the pasture where their horses grazed peacefully. The barn Yates had expanded with his own hands, the fields that sustained them. You've built something remarkable here, Flora observed, following her gaze. Both of you. Yes, Freya agreed, resting a hand on her still flat stomach, where a secret third child had just begun to grow. She hadn't told Yates yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news. More than I ever dreamed possible after Thomas died. Life has a way of surprising us, Flora said wisely. When one door closes, another opens, Freya finished. Or in our case, a whole house full of doors. That evening, after their guests had departed and the children were asleep, Freya and Yates stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sheriff Blackwood, Freya said, testing the sound of it. It suits you. Yates pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist. Are you truly all right with this? I meant what I said to Hollister, my family comes first. If at any point this position threatens what we've built, then you'll make the right choice, she finished for him. I know you will. He studied her face in the fading light. How do you have such faith in me? From that very first day, you've seen something in me that others missed. Freya reached up to touch his face, tracing the laugh lines that had deepened over their years together. Because I see who you really are, Yates Blackwood. I always have. And who is that? He asked softly. A good man, she replied simply. A man who chooses right over easy. A man who builds rather than destroys. A man who loves deeply and completely. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. A man who's going to be a father again in about 7 months. Yates froze, his eyes widening as her words registered. Freya? Are you saying yes? She confirmed, her smile radiant in the gathering dusk. Flora confirmed it today. Another little Blackwood is on the way. Joy transformed his features as he lifted her in a gentle embrace, spinning her once before setting her carefully back on her feet. A third child, he whispered in wonder. Our family growing again. Life continues to surprise us, Freya said, echoing Flora's earlier words. Yates kissed her then, a kiss filled with love and gratitude and promise. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. Thank you, he murmured. For what? For seeing me, the real me, even when I was the most wanted man in the territory. For believing in me when no one else did. For creating this life with me. His voice grew husky with emotion. For loving me. Freya's heart swelled with a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. Always, she promised, through whatever comes next. As darkness settled over the land they had transformed together, Freya and Yates Blackwood stood entwined in each other's arms, surrounded by the home they had built, secure in the knowledge that their greatest adventure, their life together, continued to unfold before them, rich with possibility and boundless with love.